We are members of the National Party here in the west of Ireland, and we are in one of the largest strongholds of Irish Gaelic tradition and culture, the Conamara Gaeltacht. The very soil of this land bears witness to a heritage which is unmatched anywhere in the world. Every stone wall and boring stands as records of the people who built them, our people, our tradition, our culture, and most of all, our own native language. These are the magical places where our culture remains at its richest, some of the last locations where the authentic soul of the Gael can freely assert itself, not beholden to imperial dogmas or the disintegrating pressures of international finance cartels. It was this land, its people and its practices that stoked the hearts of men like Páirtí and Roger Casement, and which lit a flame which could not be extinguished, and which lit the path to an Ireland both Gaelic and free. Men like Pearse did not fight for the is and the tá, they fought for a whole Gaelic unity of language, people and rooted tradition. Presently, this righteous harmony is on the verge of complete destruction. It is not the old foe who has been responsible for the complete war waged against Gaeltacht areas over the past 100 years, but rather it is the fault of institutions who style themselves as legitimately Irish. How do they erase a people who have refused the soup for 1,000 years? You must convince the people that it is not soup and that drinking it is somehow congruent with the faith of their fathers. Willingly reducing the percentage of native Irish people now incurs the name diversity, and the people behind the scheme pretend that its proper names of replacement and plantation are in some manner controversial and outrageous. It should perhaps be obvious that getting rid of Irish people means getting rid of Irish communities. The ruling powers see our culture as a luxury at best, but more generally as an obstacle to the removal of Irish people from their land. Indigenous song and speech does nothing for GDP. Being able to trace the origins of every local family and identify their interconnections going back to the Middle Ages may create a unity with a proud-rooted identity, but it does nothing for the yield curve. It does not pay back the loans to the IFF. In place of a proud Gaelic tradition comes nothing in particular, be it Arabic or Polish, which replaces our own language. The anti-Irish state is merely satisfied that unified Irish communities are on the way out. Since Cromwell, every attempt to assimilate us and to strip us of our traditions and heritage has been met with an unbreakable resistance. One would do well to keep in mind the words of Páirtí when he put it, "A nation is a stubborn thing, it is very hard to kill, but a dead nation does not come back to life any more than a dead man." Having failed to make us work for them, international financiers now seek to take us out of the picture entirely. Those who find such an assertion unreasonable and unbelievable would do well to observe the treatment applied already to European capitals such as London, Paris and Brussels. Putting so-called refugees first has been dressed up as tolerant and empathetic, when it obviously in fact represents the godless callousness which has already destroyed so much of our country. Now native people are derided and will soon, under the state's new internment law, be arrested for displaying an excess affection for their own people. A person is now liable to be criticised for helping his neighbour before outsiders. Love has at this stage been outlawed, and instead the title of love has been applied to the cruel process of beating and shaming indigenous people into bending before foreign hordes. The plantation of the Conamara Gaeltacht is well underway. What Cromwell failed to do, Irish traitors are accomplishing at a rapid pace. The old tyrant intended to leave us Connacht and was even willing to give us hell as well, but Dáil Éireann will not settle until every last one of us has been destroyed. It is well acknowledged and documented throughout rural Ireland that it is impossible for locals to get planning permission. One of the primary excuses which the government gives people in this area is that approximately 2/3 of Conamara falls under headings such as the Special Area of Conservation and other environmental designations. It is accepted that this extensive area of conservation is making it inordinately difficult in many cases for the attainment of planning permission. While it is impossible for native families to get planning permission for a modest dwelling, forests of colossal wind turbines get the go-ahead without a second thought, despite overwhelming opposition from locals. The whole landscape has been torn asunder by these monstrous machines, and collectively thousands of tons of concrete poured over ancient wildland without even a pretence towards any ecological concern. Why is this so? People like Eamon Ryan are set upon carving up every inch of native Gaelic countryside for the fulfilment of their insane ideological fantasies. They know nothing of the West, and they desire to learn nothing except for how much concrete and propaganda will be needed to drown us out for good. To them, the native people are not even a secondary concern, but rather an obstacle, treated with disdain and lied to and surpassed on many occasions. On a recent turbine project, residents expressed fears about the lack of marine protection and the visual impact of the turbines. A fisherman said that 5 of the 7 first phase projects granted marine area consents are in areas he fishes. He added that if all 5 projects succeed, he will be out of business. We are unable to even cut turf from our bogs, while peat is imported from halfway across the world. Red tape restrictions have been in place to the effect of choking out most of our cherished traditional practices. This is mostly done at the behest of the EU to our own clueless and treacherous political class. The Irish tourism industry is now on the verge of collapse, with government figures suggesting that up to 10,000 jobs may have been lost due to using hotels to house foreigners. Potentially billions have been lost as regional towns like Clifden are set out to miss on the summer trade. We have already seen the impact of this, with some small businesses closing their doors. Up and down the Galway coast, hotels and guest houses have become a dumping ground for foreigners, erasing and replacing millennia of local heritage and tradition. The example of the localities affected by this are endless. It should also be noticed that there are, of course, certain Irish people who have been making a phenomenal fortune of their country's destruction. For those who feel nothing towards their own people, multiracialism and forcible plantations have been like crack cocaine for profit. Our country has struggled with an influx of economic migrants, with this being effectively the sole cause of the country's housing shortages. This area relies on tourism and is struggling to make the necessary accommodation available, as documented by the amount of hotels and guest houses occupied by foreigners, well, in places like Longford, where 71% of tourist accommodation is being used for purposes of plantation. Who's to say that Rossaville Harbour, just a few miles down the road from here, isn't being eyed up by treasonous civil service and NGOs as a mooring place for the anti-Gaelic state's next madcap plan of a flotel for foreigners. The government will literally build ships to house non-Irish people, when they no longer fish on the land. The treatment received by natives is observably different. The preservation and fostering of the Irish language is a primary objective of the National Party, and practical measures are urgently needed to strengthen the economic and social life of Gaelic communities. We should have total commitment to the survival and expanded use of Irish language. Eventually, Irish should be spoken as the primary language in this country. A continuous decline in rural population is acknowledged as a huge threat to Gaelic communities and consequently an existential threat to the status of the Irish language in this country. It is now a semi-official government policy to mix and mongrelise the native population, with an influx of outsiders, both from English-speaking areas and from abroad. Planning permission, as noted, is not forthcoming for natives who have lived here since records began. Some have actually attempted to use the Irish language as a weapon against nationalists in the recent past. They have attempted to divorce the tongue from its body and have predictably failed. An Gaeilge remains where it always has been, at the tip of the Fenian spear. A mongrelization project, a dilution of culture, a lack of resource for the area, these things will surely strangle the last life out of the Irish language. Locals who have lived for generations on the land are effectively being evicted en masse by the lack of planning permission. This and other factors are helping with the decline in traditional Irish speakers. This area, like so many in the remote west of Ireland, is regarded as a playground for transplanted upper-class urban yuppies. They are supposedly, as our Fánoga, as they're called in Dingle, who look down on locals with disdain for their supposedly backward ways of thought and way of life. Our people's struggle against oppressive landlordism continues today, fighting against an oppressive government which intends to control or take over our land, be it by policy decision or simply driving us out. The government and media preach how this is an underpopulated region, how we need this injection of new arrivals to rejuvenate these areas. This is sickening and evil. This constitutes ethnic replacement actually, and the total end of our ancient lineage. Worryingly, there seems to be a preference, as described in a national newspaper article recently, for foreigners to be employed over locals. They will claim that there is a need for foreign workers, but globalisation is jobs going to where the cheapest labour is, or the cheap labour going to where the jobs are. Nationalism is Irish jobs for Irish people. There seems to be a common mindset of appeasement and almost tolerance towards the governance of our one-party system. The Irish people have long been caught in the deadly delusion that you will be left alone if you keep to yourself. If this can at all be said to be true at the present moment, it will certainly cease to be the case with the arrival of the government's new internment law. These laws will be enacted to instill fear in our communities. Having failed to keep us from the game of passing the ball between Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Greens and all the Dáil parties, they now simply seek to lock us away. Their democracy is a fake construct designed to give the masses the impression that we are governed with consent, when in actual fact we indigenous people are under the boot of a government which is despised by all and takes its orders from overseas. The thing which they have tried to call democracy is not real. It is a fake, it is a fraud. This so-called democracy is merely a means of obfuscating where power really lies. We need clear and patriotic leadership to set this country straight and to save our people from disgrace. Their decisions have touched every person in this island for the worse in most cases. It is very insightful how much of a disconnect there is between the wicked, anti-Irish sentiment of state-sanctioned political parties and the views of the Irish people. We'd always assumed that the parties were cynically following the latest opinion polls to form a platform from which they can scrounge as much votes as possible. Yet the current reality is far more sinister. As can be seen on nearly every street in Ireland, they are preparing for the imported electorate of the near future. To know and be aware of what they are up to is half the battle. This is where you can make a difference. To survive the future, you must recognise where you are. You must accept the task laid out before you. There can be no question that the political energy and the movement towards freedom lies firmly and exclusively with the nationalist right. The power of the West British banking state is now threatened, and they will try every miserable trick and deception to regain the upper hand, but the ground is shifting. It is essential that we strike back in the name of our country and of the generations who fell for her to be free. In our time, we as Irish people have the task on our hands of complete rebellion against a hateful and vengeful state. They will continue to pass laws for the persecution of the Irish people. They will not stop the endless importation of people who treat our land with the greatest disdain, and will continue to declare that we, the native inhabitants, who must bend every corporal agent towards the enhanced luxury of our new colonial masters. We are told to believe that the wants of blow-ins are in the needs of Ireland. Such vicious and fork-tongued falsehood was never before conceived. The gormless savages who would see places like Conamara permanently destroyed will not hesitate in trying to use your own noble instincts against you. And this unprecedented dishonesty must be accounted for in all dealings with journalists and politicians. It is unrealistic and downright wrong to order our nation to give itself up for the benefits of anyone but their own people. Micheál Martin condemns the use of our unrepentant revolutionary history in support of this so-called intolerant nationalism. But the land of our fathers deserves a better standard of man than that which is represented by the traitors and foreign occupiers who have usurped this country's rightful authority. They will try to make you forget everything that has moulded us as a people. The only response is to fight, or at least the only response which Emmett and Tone would have accepted. The task falls to every Irishman alive today to fight on matters big and small, locally on issues that affect your communities. While the best way to fight is under the flag of the National Party, Nationalist Party influence must be projected by any and all possible means, be it directly or by proxy. Every corner of Ireland must be filled with the glowing love and iron strength of true patriotic allegiance. As National Party representatives, we have previously been involved in lending a hand to communities resisting their erasure all over the country. It has been proven that local organised politics can be extremely productive in resisting plantations, as shown in places like Uachtarard with their wholesale rejection of the asylum scam. As you know, this is very fertile ground and a turning point in Irish history. The way things are progressing, plantation centres could appear in any town or village in the country. Foreigners are now being trained to influence local and national elections. This cannot be allowed to happen. The correctness and righteousness of our position may never be forgotten, for it has been so overwhelming. Ours is the noble task of saving Ireland's honours. We have members from all walks of life, and promisingly, we have a significant concentration of National Party members in this area. This is a defining period for the youth of the nation. The National Party is an essential channel for young nationalists. Now is the time to set the trend of the present era. We must win. There is not an alternative to victory. Get active today. As a warrior nation, we have for centuries battled plantations and weathered a millennium of colonisation, penal laws, ethnic persecution, and the genocidal plot of An Gorta Mór. The National Party represents the Irish people's interests, past, present and future. Our people have always believed that our freedom is contingent upon our will to fight. To the sacred struggle of Plunkett, Pearse and Tone, we pledge our souls without reservation. Now, if I could conclude by just adding a few comments about a present aspect of mass immigration. We have had a succession of Irish governments over the past 25 years or so enthusiastically and ruthlessly implementing those exact same policies that inevitably lead to disaster and destruction. The government currently in power seem to have promoting mass immigration at all costs as their number one priority. This will inevitably result in the appalling scenes being repeated in Dublin, in Cork, in Limerick, in Galway, in every city in the country. It can potentially happen. In your city and on your street. When the powder keg is ignited in Ireland, remember that nobody or nothing will be safe. Not you, not your family members, not your friends, not your neighbours, not your homes or not your property. Nobody or nothing will be safe when the flaming petrol bombs land on your street and on your home, and the hordes of marauding looters lay waste to everything in their path. There is a very little time left in which to avert this. Join and support the National Party, which is the only political party that is resolutely opposed and totally opposed to the insanity of mass immigration. But you must act now. If you leave it until later, it will be too late, and our country will be destroyed forever. Yes or aye.